In a series of videos on literary theory and criticism, we are going to discuss mimesis. This is one of the earliest theories of literary theory and criticism, which involves the Greek philosophers Plato and Aristotle. And this theory was prominent almost till 18th century, when in 1800 Wordsworth produced the preface to lyrical ballads. Till that time, mimesis was a prominent theory, and people added to this theory but didn't try to refute or give an alternative to this theory. So let us begin. It was the ancient Greek philosopher Plato who used mimesis in relation to arts in his Republic. Republic is a work which describes his idea of an ideal state. So what kind of art is allowed in this ideal state? And of course, Plato didn't have very positive opinion about poets. He wrote in his Republic that the gentlemen called poets and artists should not be allowed in state. Only those can stay who write patriotic poetry. And Plato accused artists, especially poets, of corrupting young minds and feeding passions and misrepresenting gods. So Plato had negative opinion about arts. So Plato thought that art is inferior copy of the created world, and the created world is also not an ideal world. So he thought that the world of an artist or the works of art are twice removed from the original. That means work of art is a copy of created world, and created world is copy of the original world. So this is it. So the original idea or the ideal actually exists in the mind of God. And God created the physical world in which we live after the idea of the ideal world or the original that exists in his mind. And then the artist imitates this created world of things. So the work of art created by artist is bound to be a kind of inferior copy of the created world, and the created world is inferior copy of the original world. And that is why art didn't held any credit for Plato. His disciple Aristotle, who also went to his academy, had a different opinion about art. So Aristotle was Plato's disciple. He was a scientist and a philosopher and a rational thinker before all. Aristotle had a great intellectual range. His works deal with botany, chemistry, biology, natural sciences, social sciences like ethics, history, metaphysics, language, rhetoric, poetry, poetics, psychology, zoology, and whatnot. So this Greek genius produced his first treatise on poetry and arts around 350 BCE. That means before Christ era. And in his Poetics, he defined poetry as imitation. Mimesis is translated as imitation, and it is also translated as representation. So Aristotle writes, epic poetry, tragedy, comedy, dithyrambic poetry means songs sung in accompaniment of music. The music of flute and of the lyre. Lyre is a kind of musical instrument. In most of their forms are all in their general conception modes of imitation. So Aristotle follows his master in defining art. So all arts in one or another way are modes of imitation. But Aristotle had different opinion about the status of art. So Aristotle accepted the term from his master, but he didn't stop there. He actually deepened and enriched meaning of the term mimesis. This is what S.S. Butcher writes in his book on Aristotle's theory of arts and fine arts. So for Aristotle, art is not inferior, but it is an improvement upon nature. If it imitates nature, right? So the work of art is a superior copy, not an inferior copy, like Plato's opinion. Nature for Aristotle is not a passive thing, but it is a creative force and productive principle of the universe. So this is the difference between Plato's opinion about arts and Aristotle's opinion about arts. So S.S. Butcher, in his second chapter of analysis, imitation as an aesthetic term, gives a kind of idea about what is meant by imitation. So the work of art is a likeness or reproduction of the original. So these are also words which are related to imitation. It is a likeness and it is a reproduction of an original, but not a symbolic representation of it. Now, what is the difference between likeness or reproduction and symbolic representation? So symbolic representation, for example, the red rose stands for love. This is symbolic representation. What is reproduction of the original? This is reproduction of the original. So this is likeness and this is symbolic representation. So that is the difference. This is love associated with rose is symbolic representation, and the image of rose after the original rose is likeness of the original. So imitation doesn't mean symbolic representation, rather it means likeness of the original. The next thing Butcher writes about the concept of imitation is a work of art reproduces its original. But how? But as it appears to the senses of the artist. So between this original and the representation, there is somebody who is called poet or the artist or the painter, right? So the role of the artist is all important in this process, not a copy but a likeness and as it appears to the senses. Imitative art in its highest form, namely poetry, mark this, is an expression of the universal element in human life. So what does art represent or imitate in its highest form, which is poetry according to Aristotle? It is a representation of universal element in human life. So something which is universal is found everywhere. It has no boundaries. All humankind is one. So that becomes universal. So love, the passion, or the emotion is all alike across the human race. Rather, it is across all species. Love is an emotion which is universal. Now, the next important thing is it is an idealized representation of human life, of character, emotion, and action under forms manifest to sense. This is what. So if you link all these four important words, work of art is likeness of the original, as it appears to the senses of artist, and it is something which portrays universal element in human life, and it doesn't only portray the universal element, it idealizes that universal element. So further, Aristotle writes that each art differs from other arts in three respects. One is medium of imitation, another is object of imitation, and the manner or mode of imitation. So this is a kind of simplified version of Aristotle's theory of mimesis. All art is mimesis, and arts differ from each other in three respects, in three ways: the medium, objects, and manner or mode of imitation. So we'll look at this theory in detail in next video.